I sent Martha. There we go. Well, welcome. And I sent Martha a copy that she's going to share with an attendee tonight of the book. Oh my gosh, it's fuzzy if you can see it, but there we go. Yes, as Martha's saying, I put fearless digital parenting because I get it. Like things are stressful and there's a lot of fear, and I teach dozens of parent classes a year, and there gets to be a lot of that. They come to me with those fears, and I understand that, and I'm not trying to dismiss the fears, but sometimes when we parent around fear, we kind of have a very black and white attitude, and we transmit those fears and anxieties to our kids, even if we don't intentionally mean it. Like it just kind of, it flows in and it changes the household. So I try to focus on, I have a lot of nuance. I address things with nuance and humor, and try to make parents a little less scared. So I will share my screen here and I'll talk a little bit more. But as Martha said, I would love to know a little bit more about you. So starting off, if you want to just put maybe ages of your kids, maybe and something that you're experiencing in your home, and I will pause a few times and then open it up a little bit more for questions at the end. But I'd love to get a sense of our ages and stages here and our group. So let me pull my presentation up here, and I might have to switch the slideshow around and all that, because I think I went to the very end. So let's see, I'll pop it up. And is it looking okay, or does it need to have the swap screen thing? It does. It drives me crazy. You know how that happens. So okay, I got a couple screens on here, so if I'm looking elsewhere, that is why. So looks okay. You can just see the one part.
No, we can see kind of the
good. Sometimes it does that. It wants to swap the displays on me. Okay, is that better?
That's great.
Okay, and I'll ask you, Martha, because I'll just be kind of reading here, and I'll just pause if you had any questions or things that come up.
Okay,
so, but
I
can get to know people.
Yep, I can tell you right now that we have students in here, that parents of students that are ages 8, 11, teenagers 13 and 14, so 12, yeah, in that age range.
A lot of tweens going on here. That's great.
Yes.
Yes. And I shared with you, Martha, maybe you can share that with the group too. Common Sense Media just did their tween and teen media report about screen time and what things are popular that some of your parents of tweens might be interested in, if you wanted to put that in the chat box there.
Okay,
great. So glad to have you all, and I'll kind of look back and forth, but I'll try not to look back and forth too much. As I said, I'm Carrie Rogers Whitehead with the Digital Responsibility, and I'm out in Utah, so I'm a couple hours before you. Sun's still out, and we are the state provider of online safety and digital citizenship education. So we teach the whole entire state, and we are actually contracted by the state to teach parents. So, and we teach K through 12 as well. So when I give this presentation, I bring in a lot of our surveys from our students and our work with students and parents, and try to give you an on the ground approach. We work closely with the Internet Crimes Against Task Force out here. If you are ever interested, they know that different ones will come out to schools and give presentations around the law around some of the technology piece, but we work closely with them. So we have kind of a picture of the good, bad, and the ugly of what's out there. But as I said, I try to treat this with nuance, because we don't want to address it with fear, because we're not always our best selves when we address it with fear. So yeah, parents, students, and educators that we work with here, we kind of make it very, very interactive, coloring and activities and discussions and all sorts of things. And it is interesting talking to both the students and the parents on this subject, because I get different answers to different things. We actually survey our students and ask them how they feel about social media, and the students are more positive about social media than the parents are, for sure too. I asked students, what would you rate your screen time as about normal, or too much, or too little? And so the students will often rate their screen time as normal and not a problem, where you hear it differently from the parents. So I hope I can give both of that perspective. It's interesting talking to both groups there. So I have a little Easter egg on this page. In the bottom right corner is a picture of my son and my husband playing Switch together. And I will talk a little bit about gaming later. I love talking about gaming. I know, Martha, you attended my presentation on that subject in gaming and mental health. So that's a little Easter egg there. I have my husband is I'm recently remarried, and gaming has become a really wonderful bonding experience for our family and brought our family closer together. So I love to talk about that. But there's also the not so good side. So as I go in this presentation, I'm going to, this is just a little bit more about us. At the very end of it, I'm going to go into some specific detail on apps and platforms to watch out for. I call them my red flag apps. And so there will be some not safe for kids content at the end of the presentation. So I said good, bad, and the ugly is what we're going to cover today. And the ugly will be at the end of this presentation. So there's a heads up there. So go here. But I want to get a sense from what you see. What's going on in your home? I got some ideas. We got a lot of tweens here, which is great because I have a tween. So I love talking about tweens. But what are you seeing in your home? And if you want to share anything, and Martha, if you want to share some things that you're seeing maybe in your school or with your grandkids too.
All right. So people are welcome to put things in the chat if they have anything that they want to share. But the things that I see in here at school is just the amount of time that kids are spending on their screen and on social media, and kind of just not a lot of sleep seems to be happening sometimes. But just a lot of screen time that sometimes even the kids will say, I know I'm on it too much,
Yeah, and that increase is mainly coming from online videos. So I don't know if we have big kids who love YouTube in their house. It's the online videos has been the biggest jump. Not as much social media. I mean, it has jumped, and gaming has jumped, but not to the extent of online video watching. And adults did that too. We had a huge numbers of increases of just video and streaming content going online. So I'm curious if anyone else has had some of those experiences. And when I say online video, that includes TikTok, because that is video. Yes, social media, but it's also online video. But yes,
right.
YouTube and TikTok.
Some concern about inappropriate texting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely happens as they're navigating a lot of stuff. We're going to be talking about puberty a little bit later in this presentation on that topic too. Any other thoughts or comments?
Comment here. I find that if I don't limit the screen time, they will not stop watching. I worry about how they will self-regulate as adults. I do limit it for now.
Yeah, that's a struggle, and norms have been created. So I was in a fifth grade classroom a couple months ago, and they had been back in person this school year, but the last school year they were mostly online. And I was literally talking about digital wellness and what we do in our downtime and balance and all of that. We were doing an activity in the classroom, and one kid brought out his phone that was not allowed in the school in the middle of my digital wellness presentation. And, he had a fit. He just could not have it. It had become a norm. So norms it's easier to create a habit than break a habit. And a lot of those screen time habits were made. And then now we're going back to school. The irony was not lost on me in that presentation there. Yeah, so definite increase in screen time, and from all age groups, adults too. Mm-hmm. Adults had a lot more screen time in our isolation and being at home.
Yeah, some social media issues of feeling left out, knowing when other students are online, what are they doing? If they're not on, they're missing out. I definitely hear from students in both this school and previous schools of, all my friends have phones, I don't, and that fear of missing out or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that peer influence, we're going to talk about that with tweens. It's big, and if a 12 or 13-year-old comes and says, "Well, everyone has a phone but me," they're actually telling the truth. There's that huge growth in smartphone adoption during those tween years, and so that's a tricky time. So we'll definitely talk about that. Yeah, but mom, everyone has it. And usually you dismiss it. No, not everyone. Nope, nope, they do. They probably do. That's hard to say no at that point, right?
Yeah, yeah. Additional thoughts about sometimes it's the adults that also can't limit themselves. So I love the phrase, it's a battle for humanity.
I say this, and I say this to teens because I mean, like if you go in there, teens don't like adult. I try not to lecture them. I try to have discussions with them because they've kind of, sometimes my experiences with teens is they don't listen as much to adults, because why should they? Because the adults haven't been the best role models themselves. So we can all improve. Yeah, well, keep putting things in the chat box, and I'll pause a few times and ask you, Martha, what you're seeing. I can see that I mentioned the story of some of the kids struggling with not having their device on them all the time. In my home, we have had more lax screen time rules, right? We had that a little bit too we were dealing with some sickness earlier this year. And even after a couple of weeks, it takes a bit to get back to where, it takes just a bit to fall off that wagon. So I have to admit that when we got sick, we got breakthrough infections this year, all the rules went out the window on screens, and now it takes longer to get back to normal. So I use this word digital citizenship. It's a mouthful, I know it, but I try to get parents to look at the big picture when we're talking about screen time and safety. And there's a whole bunch to safety. We're trying to prepare them for the digital world and the real world, which are kind of enmeshed here, and being accountable members. That means being able to properly evaluate information, to know how to buy and sell, how to communicate properly, how to express our emotions. There's a whole bunch to this topic. And I use the analogy sometimes of a car. If we're just teaching our kids about what a stop sign does, and how you can get into an accident, well, we're not really teaching them about driving a car. We're just teaching them one piece of it. And to really be a responsible driver, that you need to know defensive driving and what all the parts in the car do, and understand what all of these symbols mean, not just one piece of it. So when we're talking to our kids about this, hopefully we're looking at a holistic way about all these different elements of how technology influences our lives. So there's my plug for digital citizenship. And I'm not going to go into every single piece of it, but digital citizenship includes everything from media literacy to digital literacy to the commerce, our buying and selling, law, ethics, all of it. There's a big piece of it that we just want to address this issue beyond just the safety, to get the bigger picture there. And thank you for being here. Because the fact that you're here is a big deal, because look, you're tired. It's been a long day. It's after dinner. You maybe just want to have your own screen time. Just maybe you're on a few tabs right now. That's fine too. I don't care. But the point is that you're trying, and this is not easy. But I find when talking to kids, sometimes I know it doesn't sound like it. They'll maybe like roll their eyes a little bit when you ask them something, but they still want that attention, and those conversations with them. They crave that, even though they don't always act that way, especially tweens. I'm looking at you, tweens. There. So anything else you want to add, Martha, before I go into our, I'm going to give a framework and then move into the first M of digital parenting.
There's comments here about tagging onto the adults using devices. It's challenging when a lot of times when you're multitasking, planning, scheduling, looking things up, working, but all the kids see is that you're just on it. They don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that's the perception that it's a struggle time to explain that you aren't on it for fun. That sometimes we do have to use our devices for tools. And I think that's part of that journey, is understanding the difference between when, technology is a tool or is it a toy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I teach digital wellness to professionals. I've done some professional development and like, how do we balance technology? What are some apps we can use, all of it, because this is a struggle, especially as we have had more remote work. How do we deal with all of these distractions too? It's hard for adults. So and I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll be talking about that a little bit into model, but I want to bring this topic up. This is a quote from a professor of psychology that I like. We do not say those who are depressed have bed addictions. So it's helpful to look at like the symptom versus the cause. And I'm not saying that technology doesn't have an effect on us. Of course it does. But I encourage parents to look at the why behind the behavior and what's happening there in their lives or at school or in their physical health or sleep, or to look at a holistic approach instead of just looking at the tablet or the phone, because the phone can exacerbate issues, but it also can be a lifeline to friends. So it serves both purposes. And I always look at the why. What is this behavior signifying instead of what are they using? Because if it's not a phone, it could be other things. We all self-regulate in our own way. And some ways are just maybe healthier than other ways. But what is the why? I'm sure you talk about that, Martha, in your classes. So. But yes, I'm going to talk about the 3 M's, and I broke this up because years ago when I started doing these digital parenting classes and talking to parents and figuring out like developing the curriculum, I just found that like parents didn't understand developmental stages. And I get it. Like they just hand you a child, you're not trained on brain development or motor development or communication or language. That's just not something you learn really, unless you're in like child development or education. It's not something that's necessarily taught. So there was a disconnect there was this lack of understanding of where exactly they are developmentally and our expectations. And this is where that frustration and that dissonance comes in a lot with parenting, is that our expectations for our children are often unrealistic or developmentally inappropriate. So I am dealing with this at home. In my new marriage, he has never had a kid. And so I have to often explain to him, I'm like, I know that's frustrating, but that's actually developmentally appropriate behavior. He's like, he's like, kids 5 to 8 look the same to me. I don't know. Like, what is this? Like, how do you deal with these little humans? Like, what's normal? Oh, they don't do that at that age? I mean, well, why would he know? So I actually have to deal with this in my own household of like, yes, I understand, but that's actually normal behavior. So, I mean, what is normal exactly? But what is developmentally appropriate? And having the expectation that our children can just naturally self-regulate around technology, which is designed to pull them in, is unrealistic. It's hard enough for adults to do it, but kids with their developing brains are struggling. So talking about this younger age, so I broke these up, and these are like big points that we touch on. And these are things that we teach in our classes when I work with younger kids too. So I know we got some younger kids around here. And at these ages, this is like 0 to 8 going on. So there's a big spread, of course, and I'll talk a little bit about the different ages here of what we talk about. When we go into the younger elementary, we spend a lot of time talking about asking permission and being nice to our device, because they don't always know how to handle, how to do things. We're starting a pre-K pilot program where we actually have activities of like, would you throw the phone in chocolate pudding? No, like, how do we actually handle that? Because how would they know how to treat things at a certain age? But asking permission is a big one. I'm going to skip over here, and then I'm going to circle back, because it's when children stumble upon this content, it's usually they're not looking. They don't have the vocabulary. They don't necessarily, children really don't develop the motor skills to do any typing until maybe first grade or so. So they're not like typing in a bunch of stuff. I mean, and they don't know how to spell. They're struggling to spell. So they're not like looking for this content as much. They're stumbling upon it because it was recommended to them through the algorithm, or through their parents' device, or through their older siblings' device. So that concept of asking permission is a really basic first lesson. If you want to keep your kids safe, they need to not just grab and take things and start, doing it just like they think so. So when we go into to classes, we have this little last technique. It's a basic mindfulness technique. Leave the screen, just go away, ask an adult, and say something like, what did you see? And think about it. So along with this last technique, that thinking piece is like how it came up, because maybe it was just an automatic that the recommendation algorithm sent a video their way, or it was a pop-up. I know, talking to parents, a lot of times children will find inappropriate content through the freemium games. So this happened with my kiddo. There was a game like of a cat that just like does fishing, Cat Go Fishing or something like that. I can't remember the exact name, but if you watched an ad, it would give you more chances for the cat to go fishing. And an ad popped up and I was like, what is this? It was just, let's just say cleavage galore. And I was like, how did that come in this kid's game? So those ads that pop up, they're not necessarily searching for it, but it surprised my kid, like, what is this thing? And I'm like, why did the algorithm think that was appropriate for the cat game? But it did. You don't always know what's going to pop up there. So teaching, asking permission, and talking about like, what are some words? We're teaching some vocabulary words like pop up, like click, like video, can help with some of those safety issues. So appropriate device use, vocabulary, and this is where you'll start talking about the safety online, because a lot of the kids, they're not going to join social media until they're older, typically not at this age, they're not there, but they are still maybe engaging with strangers on games. So having a conversation on those games about talking to people is a big one. Roblox and Fortnite both have options where they can talk to children. So I know that there's a lot of talk on social media, but at this age, it's more of a conversation of safety through gaming, because that's where they're more likely to run into it. Some modeling behavior is a big thing that we're talking about, and someone commented, adults are not always the best at modeling that behavior. And I like the point of like explaining what we're doing, because a child first gets when they get a phone or they get exposure to a device, it's often a video or it's an entertainment. I mean, you're not, a 3-year-old is not doing spreadsheets. They're watching a video or playing a game. So at that age, they're just going to assume that every type of technology they get is a game. And so they're like, wow, well, mom just keeps playing games and ignoring me, because at that young age, what are they going to assume? They associate tablet, phone, laptop, everything with games or videos. So that can send an unhealthy message that you don't necessarily mean. So one way to push back on that is this concept of narrative parenting. It's from Dr. Dana Boyd. She writes some great stuff on technology and young people. And just to narrate what you're doing. This is also a great way to teach some of those basic digital vocabulary words, that the phone is actually a work device, that it has things that are important for the family, that you are not just sitting there ignoring. I'm not ignoring you playing a game. So I still do this, even though my child is older. If I am happening to be working, not in my office, but in another area of the house, then I will say I am working. So it's not this feeling of I'm just ignoring you. So narrative parenting, this is great for learning those literacy skills. My background as a librarian, I used to teach early literacy to parents all the time. And I would tell parents that just talk. It does pay off in your grocery store. Point out things, talk all the time. Even if they are a baby and you don't think they're hearing anything, they are still absorbing those words. So you can teach them some of those vocabulary words. So healthy digital lifestyle, personal safety, we addressed that through understanding the vocabulary words and treating it as asking permission is a big one. And this is another big piece here at the young age, is learning how to self-regulate. So you can kind of teach this in just like subtle ways. This is this is a big one for your whole entire life. And I know Martha, who teaches social emotional learning, is like, this is a huge one. Self-regulation is a big one. That we, even in classes, will ask that we'll have them wait, okay, you got to wait your turn, or, like stand in line, or those are kind of strategies that you can start teaching at a young age. We do sometimes mother may I activities with the littler ones, like the K-2, because they have to ask permission and they have to wait till they get permission to do that. So it kind of is encouraging some through gaming, through some of those self-regulation skills. But this is a recent study from Computers and Human Behavior, has a lot of great research if you're looking for, effects of technology, behavior, all of it there. And this is a quote from the study of: parents should avoid using media as a primary way of regulating their children's emotion. So this is for toddler ages, and they are learning to self-regulate. We have to learn our entire lives, but especially at this like 0 to 3 age is a big one for brain development. If you ever been with a toddler, they are like little ids. It is mine, 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 no patience. I want it now. That's a big thing that they're going through because of where they are. They're learning this stuff. So what happens is that we need to encourage them to do their own self-soothing, to do their own emotional regulation. But so often that natural process of waiting, maybe having a little tantrum, is interrupted by technology. And you've seen this, you've seen it in the grocery store, I'm sure. You've seen it in a line, maybe you're at a park somewhere. The child gets upset and they get handed a device. And look, I get it. It's okay once in a while, sometimes you just got to get through the checkout lane here, but if it happens over and over and over again, it interrupts that kind of natural process of learning self-regulation. So this is a big one that starts at this age and needs to continue. So screen time guidelines. I know I've had some people bring up screen time, and I get this question a lot in digital parenting classes, like how much specifically for what age? Well, the American Pediatrics Association really doesn't have any advice beyond age 6. There's no like clear cut, oh, the 13-year-old needs 3.5 hours a day. There's no guidelines beyond those older ages, but there are for younger ages. So let's go over some of those. Now, I will say the American Academy of Pediatrics relaxed their rules a little bit a few years ago, probably because of, just more research and things come out, but they still have a strict no screen time under 18 months. And there's different reasons for that. One is this concept, developmentally, we're going back to our developmental stages, called the transfer deficit. And this is, so kids' brains, you can attend my presentation here and remember and be able to apply something that you've learned. A 2-year-old cannot apply really what they learn on a screen to real life. So they did studies of like toddlers trying to, they would show how to do a puzzle on a screen, and they would put the puzzle in front of the 2-year-old and ask for the, nope, not happening. They can't transfer things from a screen to real life very well until they're closer to 3. And so keeping screen time very, very limited is more developmentally appropriate at that age. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, APA, says limited live video chats. That makes sense. They want to keep in touch with their relatives. And then interactive touchscreens. So an interactive touchscreen is not just like swiping, but hey, let's color, or here's a puzzle or something that way at that younger age. So keeping in mind where they are. Now, this means there's actually been some research around those baby Einstein's videos. Do you remember those years ago? They were everywhere. Oh, my 2-month-old will learn Spanish. That's not how 2-month-olds learn Spanish. They learn through child-directed communication. And it's fascinating when you look at those infants, they can make more eye contact, and that's how they learn. And this is another reason at the younger ages, as they're learning those communication literacy skills, to be careful about what is playing in the background, because they're learning from you. And all that extra noise and screens is not helping them necessarily learn those language skills. So for language skills, really, really limit the screen time under 2 years old. They're not transferring that knowledge to real life. Preschool, the APA has different recommendations. There is more research. So PBS, which has been around for what, 50 years at this point, there is they hire a lot of psychologists to actually create that content. So when parents ask me what's good for their preschooler, I say go to PBS Kids, a lot of great apps on there. But so quality educational TV is okay. Now I'm looking at you, Paw Patrol, but I'm not necessarily, they have the psychologists making Paw Patrol, okay? They're not the same as maybe the ones making Sesame Street. So, try to escape Paw Patrol. It's just everywhere there. There is little research behind educational apps, and this is another thing that I tell parents for younger ages that want. And I'm not saying there's some great apps out there, but there is no like rating system on apps. The rating that you see on Google Play or it's created by the app developer. So the app developer probably doesn't have a graduate degree in early childhood education. Maybe they consulted with someone, but they're a developer and they can just smack the label education on there, and there's no purview or anyone like taking off the apps. They can just say educational. They can have their own rating system on those too. So just be aware. It's kind of like movies. The MPAA is a voluntary run industry association. So, you have to take that with a grain of salt. Children 6 and plus, the APA says to limit screen time, particularly on mobile devices. Note that it doesn't say like a specific number, but I find it interesting that they call that one out. And the reason I think that they're doing that is because mobile devices are inherently isolating. Typically, if you're on a phone, you're not talking to someone or playing with someone. At least if you're watching TV with a family, there's more interaction, but some of the mobile devices encourage isolation. They can be done with other people, but it's often, tucked away. So that's some of their advice on mobile devices there. So I will pause if anyone has any questions or comments. This is the kind of roughly 0 to 8 age on modeling behavior. Oh, this is tough stuff. I admit that I used a lot of YouTube Kids trying to get ready in the morning when my kid was little. So I am the first to say that I use some screens to self-regulate. Sometimes you just got to do it. But yeah, it's just when it's a pattern all the time that it gets problematic. I do like YouTube Kids. I know it has its problems, but I love that there's a timer on it. And at one point I had tricked my child to think the phone needs to go to sleep, and it was great. I didn't last too long, but it like takes a little nap, which was nice. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to, I think, this age group that a lot of people are dealing with, and I'm dealing with myself. I call it manage. So, we're trying to modeling behavior at the young age, and now we're more managing. So we're giving them a little more freedom here because they're getting older and they're exploring and they're doing things more. But we're still kind of managing that. We have more, passwords, the friends, who they are. Now, I know that this is not always a popular thing when I tell this to parents, but at the teenage, you don't know some of those things. But at this age, as they're starting to get their own online identities, getting out there more, you do know those things. So big topics at this age is public versus private information. They're sharing more things. This is when they start getting on social media. And I know they're not supposed to until they're 13, but they do happen earlier. So this is where we start having things on communication. They're learning how to type and they can write incomplete sentences. And so how do we speak to people? And I honestly, digital etiquette is definitely something missing. We also talk about boundaries. When I speak to upper elementary, we talk a lot like how we tell our friends no, and what are our boundaries around technology. What are the choices we're making? And they can make some of these choices for themselves about how they're going to manage their time and manage their friendship. And this is where you really build on that foundation and that environment of trust, because they do move away from you at this age. And we're going to talk about that. So you want to be that place that they go to. So this where they are developmentally, going back to that, I call this a little, I jokingly a little bit, but this is a bit of the danger zone, 10 to 14. So when I was a librarian, I worked in kind of a high risk environment, high poverty rates, and they actually decided as a school district that they were going to only have the junior high have 2 grades, 7th and 8th grade, because the research and the graduation rates and all the data was showing them that if they could get those kids to 9th grade into that high school, they were not set, but they had gotten over the hump. So that community added a community center. They changed the junior high. They put more counselors and services in that junior high to really focus on 7th and 8th grade. And being there and being part of that we were just down the street from the junior high, really helped me understand those developmental ages too. This is where peer influence is at its highest. And this is where they're simultaneously moving away from you, but where they are needing your guidance more. So it's a fascinating time. And so I kind of summarize, I like acronyms. I got the 3 M's and I got the 3 P's. So we got 3 things going on at the tween age. We got that peer influence that is so high. They want to be like their peers. This is normal. That is normal behavior. You've got puberty that hits. It hits girls younger than boys, but most of the kids are gonna start puberty, and some will get through most of it by these ages. So puberty, I guess I could have pimples on there, that happens. And phones. This is when smartphone adoption, and I'm forgetting the stats that I got from Common Sense. It was somewhere around, on the top of my head, someone can correct me. When I was reading, it was around 15%, 20% around age 8. By the time they were 13, it was roughly like 85% smartphone adoption. So this is when they get their first phone. And so if a 13-year-old says, everyone has a phone but me, they are telling you the truth, because this is when that happens. But in a 3rd or 4th or even 5th grade classroom, you have a wide range of smartphone adoption. This is tricky for educators because they're dealing with a wide range of digital literacy skills and experiences. You have some kids that have never had a phone. Things are very strict in the home as a 5th grader. And you've got some 5th graders that have had something since kindergarten. And they've had years of experience navigating things online and maybe have social media accounts and they are on their own Snapchat. So it's in the education realm, it's also, how do we teach this? If you've ever been into, so I'm a parent volunteer in my kids' 4th grade classroom. Oh my gosh, the height differentials. Some of them look like they're just like kindergartners. And then some of them look like 16-year-olds, and they're all in the same classroom. I was like, remember going there the first time and seeing some of the girls. I'm like, should we be here? You look way too old, but that's what happens. Their bodies change at different rates, and you have different rates of smartphone adoption. So this is hard for parents. This is tough because their bodies are going through a lot of changes, and that's just uncomfortable and scary and just weird, feels strange. And they're trying to find this validation. They're trying to navigate this process. And so they're going to go to their peers to figure things out, because they're looking to their peers. And this is where that danger zone kind of comes in, because that peer influence is so strong. And let's be honest, a 12-year-old asking a 12-year-old is not necessarily going to get the correct information about some things. So you being there is really important to them. And I say, not in a mean, like rude way, but understanding where they are developmentally can help you parent better. So when I was a librarian, I said we were across from the junior high. We would get 200, like roughly 200 junior high students every day at the library after school. And I was just in tween drama land. It was just every day. And I learned over time that if there was an issue and there needed to be some discipline, and I sometimes they had to be kicked out for the day because of their behavior. I had to be very careful about how I did that. If I disciplined a 12 or 13-year-old in front of their friends, I made them look good and by being the naughty kid. So my intention was like backfire. So I learned to have to take them privately or be really careful about how I communicated with these tweens in front of their peers. So that goes back to that creating a relationship of trust. So as the librarian, I was there every day. they'd see me treat the kids the same. And so they would come to me and they would listen when that discipline did have to happen. But it took some time to build that. So don't necessarily discipline your kid in front of their peers. That can backfire. I've seen it happen to Romeo and Juliet situations. This is how that happens when you come on a little bit too hard. So keeping it private, don't putting it on social media. I cringe when I have seen parents do this, talking about their teens or tweens online, and oh my gosh, you won't believe that's just like the worst thing you can do too. They are turning to their peers. They care very, very much of what their peers think. So you be the mean parent. Give your kids a scapegoat. If you decide that, nope, you're not going to get a phone till this age, well, have them blame you. And having the expectation that they can just like stand up to their friends is not necessarily developmentally appropriate. I'm not saying that they shouldn't stand up to their friends sometimes, but it's harder. For us, our adult brains, we're like, why would you care what they think? You know, the older you get, you're like, I don't care what anyone thinks, but they're not at the same place. So telling them things to push back or say no, or give him a scapegoat, take the blame, be the mean parents. So along with this this subject, this is where you get more phones and you get more social media, and this is where some of that that cyberbullying happens. So if it does happen, I know that in some corners, and I've known some people that have like said, oh, we need to be bystanders and we need to we need to encourage them to like intervene. I don't encourage tweens to intervene, because they need to be protected and not be put in the fray. I encourage them to report and to screenshot and to save, and to not necessarily dive into the fray there. And I know that's not always what everyone says, but developmentally, that cyberbullying affects them more than older kids or even younger kids, or especially adults, that the effects are greater. So telling them to report, and do not respond and ignore is a better way to go. So thoughts or comments about some of that before I move on to another topic. There's the big ones for this age, the 3 Ps. We got some tweens in here. What are you dealing with?
I don't see anything coming up in the chat, but I like the comment about, not responding to those things online, but to screenshot it, report it. And that kind of really comes to basis of what you're talking about is, maintain that relationship with your tween so that they can feel that you can be a go-to person for that.
Yeah. And don't freak out, even though you're scared. I get it. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening, but that can backfire, and then they won't come back to you there. And even if you know who their friends are, but if their friends are just annoying, you don't think they're necessarily a bad influence, or just really annoying, just keep, zip your lips sometimes, because their friends are and they'll get very protective of their friends at this age too. So be the mean parent, and think about also on the language that we use. So I did a focus group, and I've talked to a few focus groups with teens. And one thing that came up is that they felt like their parents were overreacting, and they would keep using the word addiction. And they're like, my family thinks I'm addicted. My family thinks I'm addicted. And so we want our tweens and our teens to listen to us, and to be kind of a calm environment here. And there's a lot of that being thrown around, but I'm very careful about using that. This is a chart from the National Institute on Drug Abuse that actually tracks about the average dopamine release, because you hear a lot like, oh, well, phones are addicting because they release all this dopamine and we get addicted to the dopamine. Well, yes, that's true. But, so does food. So does a lot of things. And if you actually compare the dopamine release from food to meth, or video games to meth, there's a huge difference. So when we talk meth, that's addiction territory, where the brain's biology is being changed. Not so much with some of our tech. And I know this is a controversial subject, but I think we also have to be careful about the language we use, because addiction implies that we can't do anything, that I just can't, I'm addicted. And I have heard teens say that. Well, I'm addicted to video games, so why bother? And that's not what we want to encourage. You can break a habit, but it's hard to break an addiction. And so watching those words that we use with our tweens and our teens, and talking to some of the teens, they felt like their idea of what normal screen time was different than their parents' screen time. So having their screen time being labeled, they felt frustrated too with those labels. So being careful about that. These are some things to look at as we're talking about managing the different use, what devices they're on, the passwords, being careful about purchases online, because especially with games, those microtransactions and things can add up fast. Do not attach any credit card to any tablet or game system. I buy like the eShop on like Nintendo eShop, so they have a limited amount. It's gone, came out of your allowance, because with some of those games, they target children with some of these microtransactions, and they don't always understand the financial literacy piece. I'm looking at you, Fortnite, for that one. That's a lot of money that's been spent on that one. And a kid doesn't necessarily understand how the money translates into the V-Bucks or the Roblox or whatever it is. So being careful about attaching any type of card to any type of shared device is important there too. And starting to have those conversations about making purchases online. So my kid likes to play Fortnite, and we have had to have a few conversations on V-Bucks. And so he's like, well, I want this much skins and it's $7.99. And I'm like, well, how much can you get with that? Well, I can't get this one. I'm like, so what do you want to do? Like, do you want to wait? Do you want to buy it now? Well, if you buy this, you can't get that. So they can start understanding that at these ages to kind of prepare them for other things. Okay. Moving on to teens. I know we have some teens, and this is actually my favorite age of all of this group here. So if we got any teens, feel free to comment there. So we have model, we're kind of modeling those behaviors, we're managing managing their technology at the older age, knowing their passwords, managing the money, all of that there. And now we're kind of like stepping back a little bit more into monitoring. And this means like, for the most part what they're doing, but you don't necessarily know every single detail because it is normal for teens to have their own private lives and their own private identities, and they're kind of moving away. And this is a hard thing, because our adult brains, the time that passed from when they were babies to a teen doesn't seem that fast to us, but it was to them. So at these ages, when we teach teens, we dive a lot into the digital economy, and we have discussions on not only the digital economy, but like dark patterns and how user interfaces influence them. They can understand concepts like that. So discussing e-commerce activities, teens are buying and selling more online with Venmo and cash. It's easier for teens to buy and sell than it was a generation ago. So not all of them are getting those financial literacy discussions. A lot of states don't even require any kind of coursework. If they do, it's not until high school or it's elective. So I really encourage parents, starting at the younger ages, let's talk about money, because they are engaging a lot of these activities online without any type of instruction or understanding or how that works. We're talking, of course, about our public information and our digital footprint. And I tell this to teens when I teach digital footprint. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry on behalf of the older generations. This sucks for you, because when you make a mistake, it's out there. And I didn't have to deal with the same thing when I was a teenager. And I don't think it's fair that we judge our teens this way, but that's the reality, and that's what I'm here to teach you. So lots of talk about digital footprint in a positive and a negative way. And a big thing that I talk about is self-efficacy, because we were managing things and we were on top and we were more involved and we knew things, but we're kind of pushing things over to them making more and more of their own decisions. And they can't develop self-efficacy, that confidence, that sense of mastery until they do the thing. I was a kid in the 90s. You remember the self-esteem generation? You can do it. Well, guess what? If we tell ourselves you can do it, but we don't actually do it, we really can't do it. We can't just tell ourselves these. We have to try. And this is hard, but it's better that they make mistakes in your home than they make mistakes in college and blow through a lot of money and fail. So so this is the most recent stat I could come up with on Career Builder on turning down candidates, but I've also read similar things that employers will hire candidates because of something they say or they see online. And this is one of those things that I say, this is not fair that you are judged so much for your digital footprint, but it is the reality. So one activity I do with teens is actually like taking a bunch of post-it notes, having them write down some of their thoughts and like talking about how it felt to put it out there and then throwing it away. Because it's normal to have those feelings, or, we're still dealing with some puberty at these ages too. We have lots of emotions and thoughts and feelings, and those are all normal and valid. But unfortunately, those feelings that are temporary can become permanent online. So how can we redirect that? So I talk to teens about redirecting those feelings somewhere. Can you take a run? What can you do when you feel this way? And I'm sure you talk about this, Martha, in your classes too. Can we get a diary? I was working a few years back with a group of foster kids in foster care that, they had been through a lot of trauma. And I recommended the leaders buy them all diaries, and that's what they did. They got them bullet journals, and that helped a little bit. Just writing it down instead of putting it out online all the time and being judged for it, which is unfortunate. So and maybe one day they'll be 30 something and they'll be like me and find that old journal from when they're 15, and they say, thank God that didn't get out there because that was cringy. Oh, I found it. I still have it. My old journals. So a big topic here is sleep. And Martha, I was going to pause for a bit because you talk about sleep, and I know this is a big thing for you if you want to add on this.
It's just one of the things that I hear kids complain about or even sometimes they're not even complaining, but they're acknowledging how little sleep they get, and with their, phones and their tablets right underneath their pillows, and their, notifications are live, and they're not sleeping, and it's showing up in their ability to focus and concentrate.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an issue. I mean, for adults too, we're all sleep deprived, and a big reason is technology. I think of a phone. I sometimes describe a phone like a newborn. We got parents here. If you remember those ages, or maybe you were constantly sleep deprived at the newborn age, you knew where your newborn was, even if your newborn was across the house in a different room. It was like this, I don't know, spidey sense that the baby's there. Does that remember? I remember half sleeping through the newborn stage because part of my brain is attuned to the baby. Like anytime the baby can make a noise. So I kind of compare the phone, because when we do have a phone in our room, our brain is like treating it a little bit like, at any time this can cry, at any time I need to handle it. And it just kind of pushes some of that part of our brain to focus on it. So that's an analogy I use. I think outside like emergency room nurses or whatever, no phone should be in any bedroom for adults too, because of that attention. And even if you turn off, if you bare minimum, you turn off all the notifications, but being aware that it's there is a distraction. Put in another room. And teenagers need more sleep than adults. And I had that slide. Okay. I had a slide on the National Sleep Foundation, which I had read that they roughly need around 8.5 to 10 hours of sleep. Because like developmentally, we have, our babies and toddlers, and they need a lot of sleep. Their brains are growing so fast. And then we plateau a bit for those childhood years, and they need less, and their brains like calm down a little bit. And then teenagers are just like toddler brains. I mean, toddlers their brains are pushing them to explore and move. Teenage brains pushing them to explore and move. They're going through some similar development at the time, and they need more sleep. Now, from what I was reading in that National Sleep Foundation study, only about 15% of teenagers were getting that 8.5 to 10 hours of sleep. That also makes sense when you consider, and first of all, no one's fault here. Wake up, school start times. It's an issue everywhere. It's often around the bus schedule, and no one has control over that. So they have very early start times. late nights. It's a struggle. Your circadian rhythm roughly jumps about 2 hours through puberty. So if you were up at 6, you're up at 8 roughly, and you go to bed a little bit later. And that jump, that pushback, that 2 hours is not necessarily, the world is not set up for that. So along with no technology in bedrooms, understanding the effects of blue light. So blue light is what's emitted from your phone, and it kind of tricks your brain into thinking it's daytime. Some of you might have heard of that. If you can put your phone on night mode, you can change it to sleep mode. I have mine set like certain hours of the day, the screen changes more orangey, to kind of inhibit that blue light wavelength there too. So not only is the phone a distraction, but it that light that inhibits melatonin production. So it's an issue. They need their sleep. And if they tell you they use their phone as an alarm, guess what? Alarms still exist. You can get an old-fashioned alarm. It can have white noise and it can have no internet capability. Problem solved. Another big concept I like to talk to parents and to students is about like this shift from being more careful around technology to creating, to making, to being out there and developing that digital identity. There's this concept called prosumers. If you ever, Harvard Berkman Klein Institute of Technology has some really great stuff, and they study technology's effects on society. And they have this term called prosumers. And we're all prosumers. I mean, think about it. If you're scrolling, like maybe social media, and you're commenting on it, but you're also scrolling at the same time, you're both creating content and you're consuming content. So when I look at older teens, I like to look not at screen time as much as like this many hours or this many hours, but what are we doing, looking at it as a spectrum. How are we just consuming content, or are we creating content? Because to me, if we're lumping creation of content in with screen time and we're looking at that as a negative way, that's not fair, because that's really high level learning and doing, and we want to encourage creation. But most of our screen time is on the left side of the screen, which is consuming content. Not bad. I'm not saying this is bad or good, but if you're doing less of the creating and you're doing more of the consuming, that does affect how you feel, your mood, your activities. It's not necessarily going to bring you up a little bit or make you feel better there. So these are some examples that I like to encourage people to say, where are you? And maybe you feel this way. I've actually seen some research about like uses of social media. And when people were more engaged and commenting and sharing, they reported higher levels of liking it and enjoyment. And if you, as opposed to just scrolling there. So this is something to talk about when teenagers, this relates to digital footprints. They are not just, they are applying for jobs, they are applying for colleges, and they want their name out there in a positive way. So maybe that means commenting with their name, or creating, or making, or writing, or whatever it is, because they want to be found as creators, not just consumers. And consumers also, consuming is great for in a little bit. It's like junk food, it's okay to have it sometimes, but if we're consuming all the time, like we're consuming junk food, that's not necessarily going to raise our base level of happiness there. So let's push about the creating content a little bit, and our teens are capable of doing this. So any comments or thoughts, or something that you like to do to create, or maybe if you have a prosuming example there too, Martha, if you want to add anything.
So there was a comment about agreeing and taking phones out of the bedrooms at night, and a question about are you aware of or familiar about the Center for Humane Technology?
Yes.
As something that's another parent has found helpful in teaching tech in regards to adults and students.
Yes, I am. I actually met the creator Tristan a few years ago. There's a really great conference in California every year around digital wellness called Wisdom 2.0. I follow Wisdom 2.0. it just kind of talks about like how we can find that wellness in a digital environment. If you're looking for similar content like the Centers for Humane Take, you might like that as well. He's very short. remember like you feel like you see these people that you admire and you're like, wow, and then you're like, oh wait, that's not how I thought, but very smart. And I think it's what I like that they talk about is the systems of the environment. I think this is something that teens can definitely understand, is that yes, you are acting as an individual, as a consumer, but you are also having to do it within a system that you didn't create. And I think that teens should be empowered to push back on the system. If you don't like that, complain or push this, or be aware of the system that you're in. Does that make sense when I say that? And they talk a lot about the systems, which I think sometimes we put too much blame on the individual, and we have to look at the individual and the system. Am I making sense there? But that's kind of how I look at it. Okay, so consuming to creating. This is a big topic, and I know this is tough for parents because I mean, yeah, like a blink of an eye, they were just like a baby, right? But if we hold on too tight, they're not necessarily going to be prepared. So in addition to writing and running my company, I work part-time as an adjunct. So I taught for 6 years. I've taught college students, and I have definitely seen the effects over those 6 years in teaching myself. So I don't come at this just as a parent, but as a teacher. And I know since the pandemic, they have been really, really struggling with time management and balancing and all of this. I started adding during the pandemic a time management lesson at the beginning of my course, just because it had become so much of an issue. But in college, there's no one reminding you all the time. There's the syllabus and here's the due date. And if we are constantly like doing these things for them, waking them up, watching everything they're doing, pushing them and not giving them the space, then they might flounder a bit. I love teaching, but I got a little burnout this last semester. I had more of my students fail than any other semester in 6 years. Last semester. It was rough. And it was mainly because of time management and not turning things in. And I can't grade what I don't have. So I kind of wonder, we don't want to do them a disservice, because their boss isn't going to remind them all the time. Their professor isn't going to remind them. They're going to have to be able to navigate their own sleep schedules, their own work schedules. They're going to have to choose to be that creator and to do. It can't be us just doing it. So I don't mean to be grouchy about it, but it was a rough semester. It was a rough semester. Okay, so these are some on the monitor side. These are some questions and things to think about. Are we too involved or not enough? I mean, the sweet spot's going to be different for every kid because every kid's different, but they need to create their own boundaries. They need to be the ones that say, okay, I'm going to bed here and I'm going to do this much of this thing and this much of this thing. They have to create those boundaries, and that's all. But if they don't have the opportunity to create the boundaries, they're going to struggle with creating the boundaries, and all of a sudden they're 18. This is when they start applying for jobs, and there is LinkedIn for teens, which I encourage some go-getter teens to do. If you are concerned about social media use, you're not going to have as much drama and cyberbullying on LinkedIn. I'll just say that. And this is where they can kind of start exploring. College recruiters are on there and job recruiters are on there too. So yes, it's the old person's social media, but it's not as much drama for sure. And it's a place that they need to think about how they are applying for jobs, because how you applied for jobs when you were a kid is different than how they're going to have to do it. So helping them a little bit with that, and how they want to be a positive digital citizen. How do we want to create and give back too, and not just only look at it in like a scary place, because there's some wonderful things out there. And we had a lot of issues with the pandemic and remote learning, but we were able to still teach kids. And I know for my kid, who was isolated from a lot of friends, gaming was a way not only to connect with his new stepdad, but to keep in touch with his friends. So there's the positives and the negatives, and we want to promote that internet for good there too. So I'm going to segue into another section. These last few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about, especially for these tween parents here, creating a like a first device contract and thinking through that. And then I'm going to go into red flag apps I mentioned later there too, and I'll leave a few minutes at the end for some more questions. But other comments or questions before I wrap up this third M?
I just want to say, I appreciate the way that you've broken this down developmentally. And that I think is really a helpful way to look at it all. From, just in modeling and managing it, but then that whole letting go and letting go in a way that your teens are prepared to be adult citizens and be ready for that based on all the, steps that you've taken along developmentally. And I think you've laid that out well. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, technology changes as they age too, right? But their brains remain the same for the most part, right? We can parent around the brain. Thank you. So, talking about this is often we said smartphone adoption usually happens at this age, and considering a contract. Now, these are just questions to think about as devices get out there, especially if they're siblings. And there's monthly cost to this and the expenses and everything there. Parents can consider creating some kind of digital contract, digital agreement. The American Pediatric Association, sorry, anyways, I get the AP whatever mixed up in my head. There is some media there that you can have a family media plan that you can create. Also on my website, and I'll have my link up later, I have some like flow charts that you can work through on different ages as you're like negotiating what this contract looks like. This relates to that creating environment of trust for a teen, is that you're saying, hey, I'm like, we're going to let you do this. And, we feel that you're able to do it, but with that responsibility, with that opportunity comes responsibility. So let's talk through it. And you're treating them, as a smart individual, as this digital contract. So things to think about are if you're going to have a tech-free time, it's much easier to put this in writing or discuss it before something goes bad. Something happens later. What does purchasing look like? As I recommend, don't put your credit card out on these things, but also be aware that your kid just can look in your wallet, get the card once, and then take a picture and be good. I've had a few parents say, how did my kid know? Well, they don't have the card. Well, they just need the number. So be aware of that. But some of these things get really pricey. I mean, some of the phones and devices. So thinking about things, if it's broken or if it's lost, what happens there too? What are you just buy them another one? What are the consequences for that? Who charges it or repairs it? These are things to think through before it actually happens and how you're going to handle it. So those are the questions to think through. I have some flow charts on my site when developing your own family media plan, but thinking through it a little strategically. So my last two slides, I'm going to talk briefly on some red flag behaviors and then some red flag apps. And I am happy I'll do my best. I don't know everything. There's just a million apps out there to answer any specific platform or app question you have. I'll do my best. So these are things to look out for. When I say monitor for teens, I think this is part of it, looking at changes of behavior or patterns, because they're not always, they have their own private lives too, and you might not always know everything, and that's okay not to know everything, but you still should be watching and monitoring. So these are some particular ones, and these can be red flag behaviors for other like mental health or other issues too. But if they are really, really, really struggling to transition off a tech, like if they're that student who brought out the phone in the middle of a class when they weren't supposed to have it, cannot put it away, that is a red flag. The ability to transition is something that you learn, but in kids, some kids with their sensory processing issues have more struggles with transition. So this could be related to that, but they need to be able to put it away. They need to be able to have some of this control, and that's a big red flag. Use, of course, being super secretive does not necessarily mean that something is going on, but it should just back your head, maybe to say, okay, let's just watch this. If they are extra tired, they are up, maybe they're staying up way too late on their phone and getting involved in things. And I've said this before, if schools want to solve cyberbullying, or parents want to stop cyberbullying, getting their kid a good night's sleep will really cut it down. Because a lot of those negative behaviors, that the sexting or the cyberbullying, we're not all cognitively there when we're tired, and we don't always make the best decisions. So getting a good night's sleep can help with that. So these are some red flag behaviors, but the big ones are transitions and tiredness to watch there too. Okay, so these are some of them. My formatting got a little messed up on the screen, so apologize for that. That I'm going to go over now. I have some specific names here, but some of them I keep them in larger categories. So, and then I'm happy to answer others, and then we'll have some time for questions there. So a big category that I put is random anonymous chat or video chat apps. So I don't know. I have the word Omegle down here. Have you heard of that one? TikTok made it popular. This app's been around since like 2004. It is like you just talk to random strangers. If you've ever heard of a very controversial one is chat roulette back in the day. It's similar, that you just get paired randomly with people. And so you can see how that's problematic, especially for minors. Omegle really surged in popularity for pandemic. And if you think about it from a developmental standpoint, from a teen, they get a higher dopamine hit for taking risks. They like, woohoo, they just, it hits them a little bit more. So that riskiness of like not knowing who you're going to be paired with and talking to a stranger especially appeals to a teenager. Whereas our age, we're like, why would you want to do that? That sounds horrible. Like some random person just talking there. I mean, yeah, but that's how our brains are versus a teen brain. So there are different ones out there. I think Hala was one, Chitter was one. They come and go. Sometimes they pop up. They're like, they pop up and go down, pop up and they go down. But I know Omegle grew a lot during the pandemic, partly because TikTokers were putting videos of it on there. So another one is Whisper. Back in the day, I think it's still out there, but not as popular. It used to be secret. Whisper is like people put little memes on images, and there's a lot of depression on Whisper, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I get the impulse for a 15-year-old, just broken up with their boyfriend. They're feeling sad. They might just want to put it out to the universe a little bit. But that's like a flare to predators, because when they're in that vulnerable spot, the desire to talk about it to strangers is completely understandable. But that puts them out there, and they're not in a state where they're maybe like thinking is straight when they're feeling that sad or down, or they're vulnerable. So that's my part. It's very, very anonymous. Whisper is. There's also groups that are known for hooking up and things like that. But on that subject of Whisper, this could be Instagram. This could be another one there. But putting our mental health issues, it's a struggle, because you want your kid to be open and encourage and talk about our mental health issues, but also have to be aware that putting that out in some places online can attract people. They can attract some people that care, but it can also attract people that don't have their best interest. And when they are in those emotional states, it's harder to watch for that or be aware of that, because they want that attention or validation because they are in that state. It's a tough one. So get a diary, get therapy. There's other ways we can deal with this. Let's redirect the emotions somewhere else. So when I talk to, I have been on all of these apps as part of what I do. I have a folder on my phone that says suspicious apps, and I hang out on these. But I also talk to, we work with the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force out here, and a big one for them, when I hear them bring up a lot, is Kik, and you might have heard of that as well. Are you shaking your head a little bit? Yeah, Kik is very problematic, and a few things about Kik. It's very anonymous. You have to be 18, but you just click a box and say I'm 18. And same thing with like whisper some of these other ones out there. You just need an email. You don't even need a phone number. So sometimes messaging apps require like some kind of phone number, but this one just requires an email. When I investigate sites, I use burner emails, which is a thing, but there's also burner phone numbers. So that's out there too. You can get a burner phone number or a burner email, but Kik is very anonymous. And every time you log out of Kik, the whole entire, the conversation disappears. But Kik is mainly problematic a lot for their groups and just the high anonymity of texting. They have groups, I think it's about up to 50, and you can search for, hashtag sex New Hampshire, whatever it is, and it'll bring you to like different hookup groups. And so Kik, you can also do videos and you can do images. So a lot of nude pictures are shared there, or videos, and hooking up happens on Kik. One thing, if you're talking to teenagers who, they shouldn't be on Tinder, that's 18, but a lot of what happens, and this is a red flag behavior in a dating partner, is they want to take the conversation off the dating platform or off Instagram where they met, or off Facebook or wherever they met. And they often want to move it to Kik because Kik is so anonymous. So if there is a predator who wants to be with a minor, Kik would be a platform they would want to use instead of one of these more moderated platforms. There's like no moderation that happens on Kik, and it disappears, and it's very anonymous. So that's on my top of the list. Let's see, it's not as popular as it used to be, but this is one of those apps that what was it called? Yik Yak back in the day. It connects people anonymously through GPS. And there's a few different ones out there. Any kind of those anonymous connection apps. And Yik Yak was used a lot on college campuses, but it had so many issues of like sexual assault and stuff going on there. But it was like kind of a dating app. And that's one thing that's very problematic about those dating or those types of apps is your GPS is on there. Like it connects you with people in your area. And that is a privacy nightmare. And that is it's very dangerous for minors. Excuse me. Discord, I have the picture on the bottom. Look, I like Discord. I actually wrote an article about using it in education, and some teachers have done some great stuff with Discord. But I will say, since it started in 2015, it used to be a space more for gamers, and now it's a space for everything. And it's also a space for hate speech and hate groups. It's a place where doxing and there are certain private servers that are very toxic. Now, the great thing about Discord is that you usually have to be invited. You can't just find one of these private servers. You can't just stumble upon the private server. But there has been issues in maybe they'll invite people from another platform, put them on Discord, harass them, dox them, whatever, or however it is. But it's not like you're going to scroll and just stumble upon it, but there are some private servers that are very toxic. And Discord, as it's grown exponentially, but the moderation hasn't really kept up with how fast it's grown. So that's why that's on this list instead of something like a Facebook or an Instagram, which yes, they have some problematic features, but it's why you're using it. I'm going to go to certain Discord servers, or I'm going to go to Kik for a reason. That the motivation behind it, and that the moderation tools, some of them have more or less. That makes sense. So not a lot of places to report if something goes wrong. Discord's getting better. TikTok is getting better, and there are some improvements, but I think Discord has some catching up to do. One's at the bottom. What's fascinating here is I might even take Telegram off at one point. I don't know, because Telegram is a place for alt-right and hate groups, but it's also become the place of the best reporting for the Ukraine-Russian war. So I don't know. You've got heads of state posting on Telegram now. So it has changed in the last few years. So it might come off my list, but there still remains a lot of smaller just fringe theory, conspiracy, alt-right groups on Telegram, but there's also some great reporting there. So, that's the internet for you, the good, bad, and ugly. But it is on my list for certain channels, I would say. On Signal is an end-to-end encrypted app. It deletes when you get it. So it's a red flag because if I am using Signal, I could be really, really concerned about privacy, or I could be trying to keep something really private, like secretive. So red flag. Why not text? Maybe your kids really cared about privacy. That's great, but maybe they could just also text. So Signal's on that list. MeWe is the private version of Facebook. They don't have as much ads or tracking, but it's also kind of like Telegram, become a place for a lot of alt-right hate groups there too, hookups groups. It's just maybe your kid's into online privacy, but not necessarily the best place. And the last one, which I have done whole presentations on 4chan and 8chan, now 8kun, is just they're the old guard of the internet. They've been around since 2003 or something, 4chan was, and it's full of boards and it's very, very unmoderated. And that there are some specific boards on 4chan that are places for, racist, hate speech, conspiracy theories. A lot of what bubbles out into the mainstream media started in 4chan. I kid you not, I had to explain this at a meeting one time, at a government related meeting, that was a conspiracy from 4chan, because people don't always realize that's where it came from. But there's a lot of trolling culture on 4chan. So sometimes they'll try to outdo each other with the craziest story ever. And then everyone shares it and tries to get people to believe it. And then sometimes it bubbles up and moves somewhere else. And people are like, oh my gosh, did you hear about that thing? And they didn't see the context of where it happened on some random board on 4chan. So it's not there are some great places for geek culture and anime if you like that, but you can also find that other places. Minors, my opinion, should not be on 4chan, and they especially shouldn't be on 8kun, which is on the dark web, which is where a bunch of 4chaners were like, there's too much moderation here, and then they started that, and it is a toxic cesspool. So no reason for that a minor to be on that. So do you have any? These are some of my big ones, and I have to update this periodically as things change. If any platform or app or questions that you might have.
So is this something that you keep updated fairly regularly on your digital responsibility website?
Yeah, I'll update it every few months. Now I follow different apps, but if they're small, they're super small, I'm not going to worry as much about them, because most likely kids aren't going to be on them. Does that make sense? And of course I don't put the mainstreams on there because the intent and the lack of moderation tools, but I don't have this on my website anywhere. I just do this in presentations.
Okay.
But I do change it, and sometimes I'll watch something, but it doesn't necessarily go to getting on the list, and sometimes I take things off the list too. I guess you could say. But these are red flags. Just because your kid is doing this doesn't mean that something nefarious is going to happen, but it should be a major red flag. Although if your kid's on 8kun in the dark web, that's like a parade of flags to me at that point.
There's a question here about any online games that you would red flag.
I would not necessarily red flag a lot of games, but I would red flag some game communities. That makes sense when I say that. There's sometimes some of them have more toxic communities around there. And I know this sounds, because I love the game Minecraft, and it has some great educational stuff, but the YouTube Minecraft community can be really toxic. So I think that you have to think about both sides of it, and also understand the social component of the game. So Minecraft can be a very social game where you can converse and meet strangers, or you could play it differently. But there's a whole big, crazy Minecraft online community that is problematic. I would say that makes me hesitant to. I mean, I love Minecraft, but not the community. Fortnite has some issues too with their online community, but the game can be great. So I split those into two. So those Minecraft is the first one that comes to mind. I mean, yeah, the Grand Theft Auto ones are not that great, although they have some decent storylines. But yeah, it's more about the community. Like, good question there. Any other questions or wondering about a specific thing there or?
No other questions on that right now.
Okay, well then, yeah, then I will wrap up and kind of open. These are some things just in general. And if you're talking to your kid, look, this is not easy stuff. I get the fear, but these are some general questions to think about, or and if you want to share an answer to any of these questions, and I encourage parents to often self-reflect about how we're using. Are we consumers or creators? Are we narrating or are we not narrating? And to share the positives too. Sharing both sides, because your kid's going to think you're disingenuous if they only hear one word, the words addiction out of you, where you're only negative. They might not come to you, and you want to have that environment of trust there too. So sharing both sides there.
Right.
But yeah, so this is like our main site, or our digitalparenting.com has some information. I'm going to put in, let me go to this chat box. We have on this site a bunch of free resources. This is my main site. Just a tab on free resources, and we have some conversation starters you can download and talk with your kid about them. I have some in English and Spanish. I have some other videos and those flow charts I mentioned. And on digitalparenting.com, I actually run parenting game reviews. So if you are curious about a particular game, I can give you, I give it a safety score, and I give it a gaming score, how fun it is to play versus the content. So you can look at that as well.
Right. Okay, that was what you just put in there. And I will get these things that you have linked in the chat to me. I will get these out to families. Right. And will you be able to send a copy of the PowerPoint to be able to share, or is that?
Yeah, I can just do like a PDF or something.
Yeah,
yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, just give me a reminder, and
Yep.
I appreciate the comments, and I know I covered a lot, but I appreciate you hanging out here till late. It's a late fader for you there.
Right. So there was just a thank you for the information in the chat. So I also want to, say thank you, and that it's really, I'm hoping that in our school community, it begins to really open up the conversations about technology with our students and our families, because it's going to be, as you said earlier, it's ongoing. It's going to be changing, so keeping up with what's out there, and increasing our ability to monitor, manage, model it. It's going to be an ever-present thing that we need to be as good educators and good parents.
Yeah, it's not easy stuff, but you can do it. You can do it. You handled potty training. You can handle tech.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Carrie. That was really helpful. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other last questions or comments, or?
Yeah, thanks for hanging out.